An historic book has sold recently. In fact, it is, definitely the oldest Christian book in the world, possibly the oldest book of any sort at all. The Crosby-Schoyen Codex went under auction last Tuesday, and hey, sold for so much money you could almost buy a couple of Auckland houses with the money that you got for it. Joining us on the program now from Otago University, Revd Dr Katie Marcar. Kia ora, good morning, thanks for your time.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this because it's a really exciting event.
It is pretty exciting. I'm a big fan of old books, but not usually this old. Tell us about the Codex. What does it include?
Well, this is a really fascinating example of a very early book. It was discovered in 1952 in the sands of Egypt. So there were some men who were digging and they came across this pot and they found that it had all this papyrus in it. And this particular codex contains the earliest complete copy of the book of Jonah, probably the earliest copy of First Peter, but it also has part of Second Maccabees, part of a unidentified hymn or homily, and Melito of Sardis's Easter sermon or his Easter homily. So it's a really interesting collection of early Christian documents that are in this codex.
Certainly, and quite a variety there. Now, a question that comes up to my mind is why would something like this be for sale? Shouldn't this be in some museum somewhere under lock and key, or it's not usually the sort of commodity that I would think would get traded. But hey, maybe I'm wrong on this one.
Yeah. The buyer so far is anonymous, so I have no idea who purchased it. It wasn't me. So if any of your listeners have purchased it, I'd be happy to make friends.
Yeah.
But I don't know who purchased it. I was really hoping that a university or a museum or some kind of public body would purchase it just as a common good. But there is a trade in antiquities and ancient books, and so this is just one of the things that happened to come up for sale. Is pretty amazing. And it's sold for over 3 million British pounds, which is the equivalent of about more than 6 million New Zealand dollars. So that's a lot of money.
Yeah, that is quite a lot of legacy in that regard. And hey, it's a bit of the Indiana Jones vibe, isn't it? Dealers in antiquities and all of those types of things. This is a wonderful resource, though. What does the Codex tell us? What does it tell us about Christianity in these early times, and what the church was like back then?
Well, this is an amazing artifact to give us a window on the early Christian world. So it was discovered close to an Egyptian town off the bank of the Nile, close to a town called Dishna. And there's ruins or the archaeological remains of an ancient Christian monastery there. So it seems very likely that whoever owned this 2,000 years ago was somehow connected to that monastery.
Yeah.
So probably when people joined the monastery, they brought these documents with them. And one of the things that's fascinating is that this is not a New Testament, and that the New Testament as we know it didn't exist at this time. So the manuscript itself has been dated to the mid-3rd to mid-4th century. So that's roughly 250 to 350. So just in general, it's really rare to find papyrus and codices of this nature at that time. So this is a really interesting example of that. And it's not a New Testament, as I said, but it's a collection of books that all seem to be associated with Easter and may have had a liturgical significance. So these might have been texts that were read as part of an Easter service. So the part of Maccabees there has to do with suffering for your faith and religious beliefs. And so the themes of suffering and resurrection and Easter actually come out in all the texts that have been collected together here in this codex.
And this is a time of church history where there was persecution under the Roman Empire, that it wasn't necessarily that trendy to be a Christian. It was a growing sect, but it was a bit dangerous. Is that possibly why the text got hidden in the sand?
Yeah, I don't know why it got hidden in the sand, but I'm glad it did. So I don't know kind of any more than that. There was a lot of literature that's been found as part of this discovery, which is now known as the Bodmer Papyri.
Hmm.
So we have other texts as well. And as I said before, it's quite possible that this is the earliest copy of First Peter that we have.
Yeah.
But the other candidate that might be older is also part of this collection of papyri that was found.
Wow.
Now, one of the fascinating things, though, about this text of First Peter is that it has a heading that just says the letter of Peter.
Well,
So
okay.
what that means is that the scribe that wrote it, or the copy that he was using to copy it, didn't know about another letter of Peter. So that is amazing in the sense that it's giving us this window on at least this one example where the author or the copyist didn't know about a second letter of Peter. So that's pretty amazing to kind of have that glimpse of history.
That is amazing, and also wanting to know how it compares. So let's focus on the First Peter text, or the Peter text. How close is it to other documents that we have, other manuscripts, or even current translations of the text? Is there marked differences?
Now, here's a really fascinating thing. The Crosby-Schoyen manuscript is actually not in Greek. So the New Testament written in Greek,
Yeah.
but this manuscript is actually in Coptic,
Wow.
specifically Sahidic, which is a dialect of Coptic. So it's a really early. So not only is it one of the earliest examples of First Peter and Jonah, but it's actually translated. So it's in a language that's not even the language that these texts were composed in,
Hmm.
which is fascinating. So I myself, unfortunately, do not know Coptic, but it does give us a really interesting idea about what texts he might have been copying. Now, it probably came from this codex probably came from the same library that had the Bodmer miscellaneous codex, which contains the other candidate for the earliest copy of First Peter.
Yeah.
And interestingly, even if that is the earliest copy of First Peter, it actually contains a lot of Greek errors. So the copyist of that manuscript, who was copying in Greek, did have a lot of errors. So sometimes your earliest copy isn't your best copy. So that's an interesting example of that.
Exactly, exactly, and hey, be interesting to compare the translations of the Coptic and the Greek versions to look for anomalies between them. Perhaps their Coptic was better than their Greek back in the day.
Oh gosh, I'd have to leave that to my colleagues who know Coptic to give me some insights onto that. But I think that people who have studied this and who know more about it than me, I think have determined that it gives us a really early insight into the text of First Peter.
Hmm.
So obviously at this time, all the manuscripts have to be copied by hand.
Yeah.
And as you keep copying things over multiple times, you get little changes and errors. And sometimes a scribe will find something that he thinks isn't quite right. And so he'll make a little tweak to make the wording flow better.
Yeah.
And so people spend their careers kind of studying this to try to understand what the earliest form of the text might have been. So this is, even though it's in translation, it really still helps us try to have more evidence on First Peter.
Very exciting stuff, but rather than just being from an historical point of view, why are texts like this important for communities of faith? Why are these type of documents important for the church today?
Oh, that's a great question. I just think as a physical object, it's a way of kind of connecting directly with the past. There was at least one person and probably a whole community that really valued this,
Yeah.
and it shows us how they may have celebrated Easter, which is, the high point of the Christian year, celebrating, the death and resurrection of Christ. And it gives us an insight into their spirituality. And I just think that that's amazing because I see church history as the inheritance of all Christians. This is
Yeah.
our common faith. And this is a document that connects us to them in a really amazing way.
This is absolutely fantastic. And even putting it in the context of saying this is before we had a New Testament, this is before the, the copyist knew that there was a second Peter. This is before Christianity was incorporated and became part of the Roman Empire. A wonderful insight into the life of early Christians. And what we certainly hope and pray that this resource is in good hands. Whoever's paid the good money for it, we do hope that this will continue to be an asset for the Christian community.
Mm, Absolutely, absolutely. There is a really good published edition, so scholars have had a look at it,
Okay.
and they've translated the entire codex into English and written some scholarly essays on it. So if you can't quite afford the $6 million price tag for the original,
Yeah.
there are more affordable academic copies and translations that are available.
We can Google that. Isn't that absolutely
Amazing.
fantastic that we have those sorts of resources? And hey, maybe some of the stuff that we're writing today will be discovered by future generations who will wonder why we wrote these things down. Hey, Katie, appreciate your time today. Thanks for joining us.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.